and that not all students have the ability to do an exchange program. This is an opportunity to bring classrooms together. So we have several faculty who have done this, and I really appreciate the work that you have done to bring, even now, the global experience to our students and sharing with students across the globe the opportunity to be together, to be in the educational community. So we have some faculty here, and I'm going to look at the notes that Todd sent me so I get the countries right. We have faculty here who have worked with universities in Japan, the Philippines, Hong Kong, and Oman, and brought students from these places into that virtual classroom so those exchange experiences could take place. And what an opportunity that can continue well beyond the world when we return to face-to-face. Because we are used to this technology, we do have opportunities for students who would not necessarily be able to otherwise experience those exchange moments. So I'm delighted that we have faculty who are willing to share of their experiences and what really the COIL has allowed them to do. I think that it opens some doors again that will be very beneficial in the long term for all of our students. So thank you. And Todd, I turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chancellor Rooney. Yeah, basically, I think you covered a lot of the really core components of this. COIL is something we've introduced actually previously a couple of years ago onto this campus, but obviously this last year with the pandemic, it's made it a little bit easier to contemplate putting this into your classroom and into your curriculum. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and I have a very short PowerPoint just to put some context to this, so you guys, those of you who are unfamiliar with it, can get a little bit more understanding. So one moment, bear with me. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. So COIL is an acronym for Collaborative Online International Learning, and it's pretty much exactly what it says it is. So what is COIL? The idea about COIL is you connect two classrooms, two groups of students, two faculty members in different universities, usually in different countries. And the idea is to have something as small as a collaborative project, could be just one project that a group of students in both classrooms work on, to something as large as an entirely shared syllabus and curriculum. It's up to the individual professor how they want to do this. And obviously I think people start small and make it bigger as they go. But the idea is that you use existing technology to connect the classrooms in a simple way. Also, the idea is that by doing so, you contextualize what's in your coursework. So there might be some aspect of your curriculum that would really lend itself to multiple cultural perspectives. Using COIL is that you can reach out to a partner school, to a colleague that you know at a different university in a different country, and say, how can we work together? How can we share this so that our students develop this cross-cultural awareness? As Vice Chancellor said, I mean, study abroad is not something that all students can do. We would like all students to do it, but it's just not possible for financial or time reasons. And so this is another way to sort of bring the world into our classroom. So continue. So why do you use COIL? Well, these are some of the ideas that are out there that are being promoted through COIL. So you increase students' intercultural awareness, obviously, and understanding. You can prepare and excite students about the possibility of study abroad. Of course, students who go through a COIL experience, who are comfortable working with students at other universities, may become especially interested in studying abroad. It can internationalize your curriculum. It allows students to learn about disciplines from another perspective. It prepares students to work in virtual teams with peers from other countries. I think that's super important. There's obviously language issues, cultural issues, and students have to navigate that, which is a very practical, practical skill to have. Students get the experience of working with non-native English speakers, which can be one of the really challenging aspects of doing a COIL kind of project, but at the same time is one of the benefits. It also provides professional and international connections for faculty. The more you work with peers across borders, the more people you have to share your work with and to learn from. So key elements of COIL are basically cross-border collaboration or interaction with people from different backgrounds and cultures. And I want to mention here that it doesn't have to be like you working with somebody in Japan or you working with somebody in Australia. It could be you working with somebody in West Virginia. We actually had a request a year or so ago from a school in West Virginia that wanted to work with somebody in Hawaii, because obviously there's some significant cultural differences in those two places. So it's not restricted to an international kind of collaboration, but it makes sense if there's a cultural component. Students should engage in online interaction. It can be asynchronous or it can be synchronous. With synchronous, time difference can be a major issue, especially if you're working in Europe or in the Middle East. So that's something that you have to consider, but asynchronous works as well. It should be driven by a set of international learning outcomes. So obviously it has to fit into your curriculum, into your syllabus, into your learning outcomes for your class, but that should be doable. And then there should be a reflective component that helps students think about, the interactions that they had and what they got from it. COIL has been around for a little while. Some of the original proponents were out of the SUNY system in New York, and they actually have a COIL center, and they have a whole faculty guide for COIL, which is online. So you can search SUNY COIL if you're interested, and there's a bunch of resources. There's been quite a bit of work done on how to make it effective. In Japan, Kansai University has developed something called the Institute for Innovative Global Education, and they're a leader not only in Japan, but really throughout Asia in promoting this. And again, they've put in considerable resources to do that. ACE, the American Council on Education, has also been really active in especially working with Japan. And they've done a lot of, they've done workshops, they've done a whole bunch of things to promote and explain COIL. They also have on their website, they have information about COIL. And then lastly, the Japanese Ministry of Education a couple years ago came up with a grant, and they have funded, I think, 12 universities in Japan, including several of which that we partner with. Kansai University is the lead, but there's a lot of money that's been put into it, and these universities have been able to hire people to coordinate COIL activities on their campuses. So for those schools that we work with that are in Japan that are part of this grant, they are very easy to connect with because they have staff and faculty who are experienced in this and motivated and actually required to do this kind of thing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it presents a good opportunity for us. Okay, COIL at UH Hilo. So in February 2018 and February 2019, some of you may have attended workshops that were put on by the International Student Services Office. And those workshops invited people from Kansai and from SUNY to come and talk about COIL and how to work with it. And since then, we've had several brave volunteers who have jumped into it, and those are the ones who are here today. And I want to mention there are some other faculty members who are doing these kinds of things that either unable to or we're doing it later after we started this panel. So there are other faculty, plus I'm sure there's people doing this and I'm not even aware of. So it is something that's being done, but I just want to give a huge thanks to Kelly, Celia, Mike, Amy, Yoshiko, and Francis for taking your time to talk today. So with that, what we're going to do today is I'm going to let the panel members introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they've done. And then we have some specific questions that I will pose to them and that they can answer. During this time, if you have questions, I'd like you to put them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, and then I can ask that when there's an appropriate moment. We're going to try to leave time at the end so that if you have direct questions that you can just ask them. So with that, I want to invite our panelists. Now, Celia is going to be joining us. She has class until 12:15, so she'll be jumping in a little bit late. We're going to put her at the end. But I want to start out by asking our panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, the context that they're in on campus, and then, of course, how they use COIL, either last semester or the semester that we're in. So I want to start, if I can, with Mike. Mike Skinner, you want to unmute yourself? There you go. Okay, and
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Skinner. I teach history at UH, also Japanese cultures down at Hawaii Community College. And I've used COIL in my Japanese cultures course last semester, and I'm doing it again this semester. It's an online course, so it's sort of a component of that where I'm working with University of Ryukyu, and last year we just did sort of 3 weeks in a row of like a 1-hour session where the first week Okinawan students sort of talked about Okinawa. The second week, the Hawaii students, Hawaii Community College, talked about Hawaii and answered questions. The third week, we actually partnered with Hong Kong Polytechnic Institute, and then the students from Hong Kong discussed life in Hong Kong, and it was more of a conversation about culture and what people were doing in each of these different regions. So that's how I incorporated COIL into my course.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And of course, you'll be able to elaborate on that as we go on. Kelly, I'm going to turn to you next. Kelly has been one of our most active proponents of COIL and has some of the most experience with it. So Kelly, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Kelly Moran. My background and day job is in commercial and international real estate. I teach at the College of Business and Economics, mainly real estate and project development. And I'm using COIL to prepare my business students for international careers in real estate, in development, and in engineering projects in the commercial real estate world.
Excellent. Thank you. Amy, I see you. You want to unmute yourself and tell us what you've done?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Horst, and I teach music for the Performing Arts Department. And if you've been around for a while, you probably think of me as the choir director, but a few years ago, I transitioned out of that because I wanted to get into distance education. And I was teaching entirely asynchronously even before the pandemic. So when Todd introduced the idea of COIL to me, my goal was, and still is, to work in the COIL program with students from a variety of other countries, because I teach a class in music and world cultures. And the students work entirely asynchronously, and they present projects to each other where they share the music of their own home cultures. And so in starting that out, we have gotten off to an interesting start because, as Todd pointed out, the universities in Japan are very well funded and well staffed, and they've been able to provide me with a full suite of things that I can use, but I haven't yet had the time or resources to exactly return the favor. I am really looking forward to a long-term collaboration, and so I'm glad to be here, not just to share my experiences, but actually to kind of sit on the side and take some notes for my own future, because I think this has amazing possibilities. So,
Yoshiko.
Hi, my name is Yoshiko Okuyama. I'm a professor of Japanese studies at the Department of Languages. I teach Japanese language classes as well as Japanese culture classes, such as Japanese film, manga, and disability studies. And starting this fall, I'm also directing a new certificate program called JTC, Japanese Teaching Certificate Program. And today I'm very excited to share my experiences from this COIL component in my remote Japanese language courses. And this semester, I included this COIL component in my Japanese 102. And my partner university is Toyo University, which is a private, relatively big private university in Tokyo, with over 30,000 students. And this was a bilingual event in which my students who are trained to speak Japanese and introduce themselves and so forth in Japanese, and then interacted with Toyo University's English language major students, and they also introduced themselves in English. So vice versa, we change languages, and then they got together in discussions, breakout room discussions, to learn about each other's culture.
Thank you, Yoshiko. Francis, you want to share? Unmute yourself first and share.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francis. I teach writing courses in the English department, and I'm also a coordinator of the TESOL certificate program. And I used COIL in the previous semesters, but this semester I really make use of one of my classes to really do the actual teaching overseas. And most of my practicum students are actually teaching in two different countries. Others are teaching in the Philippines and others are teaching in Oman. So the main objective of having them do this are actually to train them how to teach English to speakers of other languages, especially the ESL and the EFL speakers of English, and for them also to understand the importance of global Englishes or world Englishes, and for them to have an idea also that there are different varieties of English, not just the American English. And when they start teaching English in other countries, especially with the ESL and EFL context, then they would have a clear understanding on what English is all about. And at the same time, to enhance their intercultural communication skills, because for English teachers, that's the first thing that you really have to know and you really have to understand for you to be able to really reach out this ESL and EFL speakers.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you.
Join the meeting.
Celia, good timing. Glad you're able to join us in time. So go ahead, Marjorie, and mute yourself and just briefly introduce yourself and mention what you did. Right on mute.
Aloha, I'm Celia Bardwell-Jones. I am a newbie to COIL. Todd actually approached me over the summer and said, "Hey, I think you might. There's a professor at Kansai University who's teaching your class, similar class to you, critical thinking, and that if you wanted to try COIL, this would be a good opportunity to take this up." And so because we were in the midst of the pandemic and I was already in the midst of learning all these new technologies, I had wanted to try it just as an experiment. I teach courses in philosophy, particularly ethics in cultural diversity. I look at feminist philosophy as well, looking at gendered components of reason and critical thinking. And so I thought that the course could work really well with a COIL component, since the course itself was framed around multicultural issues already. And so I tried it out. And what I did with the class, with how I organized it, was that since I am a newbie, we decided to just do 2 low-level assignments, 2 easy assignments. So they weren't high stakes in the class. It was kind of like an introduction. So we did an intro video, as well as the main assignment, the group assignment, which was a critical thinking in the global community assignment. And so yeah, that's how I incorporated COIL into my course. And I think the others in our panel have done COIL so many times, so they might have a more nuanced experience. But my experience is certainly as a newbie trying to understand how the technology worked and how it worked with my students. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm gonna move into some of the questions to let you guys elaborate some more. So the first question is, why did you choose to use a COIL component in your class? And I'm actually going to combine this, I think. Why did you choose to use it, and how did it benefit your students? So let's put those two questions in one. So why did you use it, and how did it benefit your students? So I'm just going to run through the group and let each of you answer that, and then we can have some conversation. But I want to give each of you a chance to answer that. So, Mike, why did you use it, and how did it benefit the students?
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to use it because I'm a big proponent of international studies, international experience, and study abroad. I'm kind of always pushing that for my students in my world history classes and in my classes. So I felt this was a really good opportunity for some students who maybe couldn't study abroad at the moment, or maybe were interested in it. And this would be a way to kind of get some experience meeting people from other cultures. I really think that's important. Especially in my Japanese culture class, because we're talking about Japanese culture. So to actually talk to people from Japan, or and the professor I partnered with gave a little talk about Shujiro, this castle in Okinawa that had burnt down, this very famous castle. So we got to see some of that. So I thought it was really important, a part of the component of a culture course. Actually, if you have questions about culture, go ask people from that culture. And I really think it benefited my students. I actually emailed them and said, hey, could you say something about it? So I'll just say what they said here. One said, being a part of COIL course was very interesting to me because I met and interacted with people from two countries, and they have very similar lifestyle, social issues, and also how it impacts these students. Meeting the professors from both Hong Kong and Japan was really awesome. They spoke well. I've never been to Hong Kong, Japan, but attending courses, COIL courses, like I go there. I felt like a leader for HCC in Hawaii, and we all shared some amazing experiences and values that everyone shared. I also felt I was able to learn from students and become more connected to them in a way. So that student really benefited from it, and that student was really, very interactive and answered a lot of questions. And another one said, I feel like I got quite a bit out of it. I love listening to others about daily life in another place and how different it is. I like to hear how they all still go to college and how some of them work in dorms and whatnot. Pretty cool to talk to people on that level, right? So I think that's kind of how I organized it in my course. And I didn't give anybody assignment. I just wanted more of a, if you have a question about Japanese culture, here you can, we've studied some components of that. Here you can ask other students, and not just about culture, but especially like university life in another country. And similarly, those Japanese and ultimately Hong Kong students could ask a lot of questions about Hawaii too. So I felt it was really collaborative on that level. So that's why I did it, and I felt it was successful.
And Mike, in those conversations, were the students pretty engaged, or did you guys as faculty members really have to guide it?
I was going in, I was a little worried about that. I mean, the way we structured it is each session. So we had 3 sessions. The professor would kind of give a talk in the beginning, like the first 5 or 10 minutes about a topic, and then open it up to discussion. And I kind of felt like, what if we run out of things to say? But really, I felt that there was a lot of interest between regions. And there wasn't really that much of a lull of conversation. I think everyone was able to sort of ask questions. One question that came up a lot was like language, because Okinawan has its own language. And a lot of them look at Hawaii and things people have done with Hawaiian language here as a model of what they want to do in Okinawa. And then there's some language issues in Hong Kong with those issues. So, I mean, that was one area where everyone could really kind of talk about, kind of have a good conversation about that. And then just basic, like everyday life, like, do you guys have jobs? You just go to school? What is your school like? I mean, those kind of things were really, I felt interesting. I was a little worried, I had a list of like questions, like prompts for students if there was a quiet time, but really the conversation really went, I felt pretty well once people got, and I think it's because people are more familiar with Zoom now. Maybe like last year, people would be like, I don't know about this online format, but now that everyone knows what Zoom is, I think that they're much more able to engage online, which is exactly what COIL will allow people to do.
Excellent, thank you. Kelly, why don't you share why did you choose to use it, and how has it benefited your students? Because you've used it over multiple semesters. So.
Well, I think in the business field, there's a real need to understand international business relationships. And so one of the primary reasons I'm using COIL is to help the College of Business students understand their role in as a global citizen, but also understand how to interface with international clientele. So COIL has helped a lot of my students get to know different faculty and students from 9 different countries over the past almost 2 years. And so they've come away with a real good understanding about how to active listen, how to understand different cultures, and to play a part in their upcoming business world. And this semester, we're taking the Hawaii Innovation Center in downtown Hilo, and our 3 different COIL partners are all having their students focus on how we can develop an innovation center downtown Hilo, and then bringing in international business ideas from all the other countries to in a project-based solutions. So really enjoying COIL as a business catalyst.
And Kelly, you've been using the Cyber Canoe in the library. You want to talk briefly about how that's worked?
So there's in LRC 350 on the 2nd floor of the library, there's a fantastic facility known as the Cyber Canoe. And it's like Zoom on steroids. It allows you to share, there's I think 30 or 40 computers. All the students during non-COVID times have their own computer, and each student can share on this huge screen their ideas. So it's basically a collaborative interface in the classroom, but also we're integrating 3 other universities from other parts of the world, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines. And those students can also integrate their ideas on the big screen. So the Cyber Canoe is an amazing facility. And once you've started teaching in there, it's really hard to go back to a typical classroom.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Kelly. Amy, do you want to mention, I mean, again, your experience is a little different. It was kind of, you started,
Yeah.
but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I thought that this would be a really easy thing to do because, as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm teaching entirely asynchronously. I thought it would be super easy to just incorporate anything from anywhere about music and world cultures, which is the class that I had sort of targeted for this project. And in fact, through Todd, it was wonderfully simple and very friendly to make communications with the wonderful people at the University of the Ryukyus. They're brilliant. I have such admiration for them. Because they have all this funding, they were able to come up with things that they could send to me. And where I had imagined that my students would create projects and their students would create projects and we would share them across the universities, they actually just got together in like a week, came up with a whole video series that they just sent me that I could use with my students. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. But I was also a little bit intimidated because, again, their resources and staffing are just amazing. My goal is to continue this over the long term, and I would like to go back to the drawing board perhaps over the summer and as we prepare for the fall and revisit the idea of working on a music project so that some of the conversations that Mike and Kelly are talking about happening synchronously, I can do asynchronously with projects that my students share about music from their cultures. I also do want to incorporate this video series that these lovely folks have created about traditional music from a particular island in Okinawa. Wonderful history and heritage there. And I'm already incorporating it as part of extra credit work for some of my students. And I'll actually be incorporating it in not a music and world cultures class, but a course that I'm developing for spring 2022 in music foundations, and talking about music foundations, the kind that we talk about here that's mostly from Europe, but what do they do in Okinawa? So I see all kinds of possibilities spinning out, and this is for me very much in the beginning stages. So it's exciting, a little intimidating, but I'm really glad to be part of it.
And Amy, one of the things we've talked about is a lot of your students are Pacific Islanders, and so a lot of them have their own stories that
Yeah.
So
So this is another element that was particularly attractive to me. I had the opportunity through this connection to the University of the Ryukyus to attend a seminar, a day-long workshop in December that incorporated people from all across the Pacific Rim talking about sustainability issues in education and talking about creating a particularly Pacific focused and Pacific centered viewpoint for all of these subjects. And it just kind of fired my brain up, and I look forward to seeing where that goes.
thanks, Amy. Yoshiko, you want to share? So why did you choose to use COIL, and how did the collaboration benefit your students?
Sure. As I mentioned that I use Japanese language course for this COIL-based interaction. And why did I choose that Japanese language course? Well, in pre-pandemic, face-to-face Japanese courses I teach, I always have two opportunities beyond the textbook for students. One is for them to interact with real Japanese language speakers. So I usually bring a group of international students from Japan to our class, and then they have some interaction. And then second opportunity is, for my students to discuss cultural perspectives with students from Japan. And so this pandemic happened and I felt stuck. Well, what should I do in this remote language teaching? And then I remembered participating in that COIL workshop in, I think, 2018 or 19 with you. You hosted. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I can create collaborative opportunities with one of the Japanese universities I'm familiar with. So I contacted Toyo University, and so forth. The rest is the history. And then what my student benefited. Actually, I ran a post-event survey, and they shared a really good stories, their experience and their points of view. Just to summarize, I think they mainly benefited these three aspects. One is their chance to talk to real people in Japan using the language they are actually learning. So kind of putting it in test in a sense. And the second thing is motivation. It served as a great motivation factor. They realized through this event that their vocabulary is limited, or their listening skill is not great, and so forth. So it really motivated them to learn more. And so that's the second benefit. And then third one is, of course, cultural input. They actually listened to what Japanese university students had to say about certain topics. So we pre-selected cultural questions from my student and their student, Toyo University students. And then the participants, to some extent, prepared their answers. So they exchanged those answers at the time of the event. So because there was a time to prepare, they were able to discuss, in a extended way. But at the same time, my students' language skills are rather limited compared to Toyo University's students' English language skill. So during the cultural discussion, it kind of shifted English rather than Japanese most of the time. But there are some students, advanced students in my class, who were able to come through in Japanese. So it's amazing. It was a really interesting phenomenon I actually observed myself as a teacher.
Well, I was fortunate to join that. Yoshiko invited me, and I was amazed at how much Japanese your students were using, actually going between rooms. So it was really, I think the fact that you had the chance to prepare them, to allow them to sort of, be ready for that interaction. It sort of made it a lot easier. They were able to, after the initial first 5 minutes of nervousness, that seemed like they really, I don't know, the stuff I saw was really, really cool. So, and I want to, quick, Yoshiko, I noticed that Patsy put in a couple questions, but one of them was about the time difference and managing it, because your class was synchronous. And so what did you do with the time difference? How was that as an issue?
Yeah, actually, I was going to talk about it in the challenge, question. But anyway, so first, I had to figure out, of course, the best way to match the Toyo University students' time frame and my students. So I had to have this event scheduled outside of my regular class time, which is 2 to 3. So it was a little bit later in the afternoon for my students in Hawaii. But to the Toyo University students, it was still early in the morning, like 10 o'clock they were there. So I wanted to have it in my students' regular time, but it would be too early for the Toyo University students. So we had to compromise. So they're 10 o'clock a.m. in Tokyo, and then I think 4 or 5, 3 in Hawaiian time. Yeah, they did that. And then also we had to be aware that that dates are different. So when I created flyers, I had to create 2 versions. One with Toyo University, Tokyo's time, and then the one with Hawaii time for my students. So yeah, that's something we have to keep in mind when we plan.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Okay, Francis, the question again is why did you choose COIL, and how is it, I should say, since it's still going on, how is it benefiting your students?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why I use COIL in my classes, particularly in my TESOL practicum class this semester. So first and foremost is that I really wanted to enhance the students' skills in teaching English in ESL and EFL context, where we can find that one here in Hawaii and in the US. So it's easier for me to really expose the students, through the use of COIL, and for them to be immersed in the ESL and EFL context in these 2 universities, one from the Philippines, San Pedro College, and the other one is in Oman, the Asharkia University. And also to expose the students with the learners of English as second language speakers and foreign language speakers of English, so that our students here will be trained to become better teachers of English. And one more thing is to enhance the internationalization and help the students how to deal with people, from other countries, and to develop also their intercultural and cross-cultural communication skills, and to widen the students' perspectives about teaching and learning in different contexts, considering the linguistic and the cultural context. And to expose also the students that we have the global Englishes, we have the world Englishes, and we have the different varieties of English. And that when they teach English, they will not just consider one variety of English, but they have to look at in a perspective that the existence of global Englishes is real, and the existence of different varieties of English, in different countries, it's real. And that would really enhance their understanding on how to teach English to speakers of English as a second language or as a foreign language. And also for them to learn some of the methods, the approaches, the strategies in teaching, especially, getting more inputs, from professors and instructors from other countries. And that would be a very valuable teaching experience, for them. And based on my conversation with my students and with the teachers in these 2 different universities, my students were really satisfied, and they were excited about this experience, because they were able to learn different cultures, and they're able to enhance their ability to interact with students from other countries, and not just with the students, with other professors as well. And the good thing is that in this kind of, in this collaboration that I made with these two universities, all my students have individual supervisors. So there are like, I have 11 students, and these 11 students have individual supervisor from these two partner universities. And I think that really helped them as well, because these instructors and professors are actually mentoring them on how to teach English, in their respective universities. And they learned a lot from it, especially the strategies in teaching English in Oman, and the strategies in teaching English in the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. One of my student worker that works for me is actually in your practicum. And so she's been telling me a little bit about the experience, and it's been really great because it's a real life-like real world situation, not just the teaching part, but just managing the cultural differences, managing the time differences, all of the stuff that comes into play when you're working across borders. And so it's been great, I think, for them to have that chance. So I'm really glad you're doing that. Thanks. Okay, Celia, you want to tell us about your experience with Dawn?
Yes, thank you, Todd. So I actually went to study abroad when I was in graduate school, and I learned quite a bit when I did that program. And so I've always been interested in linking linking a global learning curriculum within the context of an online learning. And honestly, I'm pretty much a Luddite in general in my teaching. I'm much better at face-to-face interactions. I like to engage my students in discussions. I really, find an interpersonal presence in the classroom powerful in the teaching. And so when the global pandemic hit, I was kind of like, what do I do? How do I adjust myself in this time period? And so I was really looking again at global learning within a collaborative setting and utilizing online materials. So I thought that this opportunity would give me a chance to just step into it, just dip in. What would it feel like? What would it do? So I came into this assignment and working with a faculty member at Kansai University with open eyes, an open mind, and just waiting for things to fall apart at any moment and being able to respond to it. And so I also said the same thing to the students when I first proposed this assignment to my students, and that they were originally hesitant, but they were excited to meet the students in Japan. They did not know what to expect. And when they asked me all the time, I said, I don't know what to expect. I have no idea how this is going to work, but we're going to do it together. And so they were both skeptical and curious. And because of the pandemic, I felt that their existential situation as learners, utilizing Zoom, were defined by both feelings of constraint and openness, because of course they were feeling this sense of like, gosh, I'm stuck learning behind a computer, but yet also open to this opportunity of engaging with someone in a different country. And that was really, I felt, important for their learning experience. Some of them expressed that sense of openness. And so in their collaborative work, they developed an introductory video. Then they were brought together in groups to think critically together within a global community. And so their assignment was choosing a topic where they would think critically together. And so the topics that they were explored were very fascinating. They explored climate change, they explored advertisements in culture, rhetorical devices in political speeches, like not just even in Japan, but in the Philippines, Myanmar. The students at Kansai University were mostly from Japan, but others were not from Japan as well. So that was really interesting to see. The main topic that they all ended up discussing, most of the groups that discussed, were due to COVID. So it was all mask mandates and controversies around that. So this was a situation I felt that everybody was experiencing globally, and that they all were able to engage their own situation in their particular ways. Commercials, and then one group actually, and one of my students basically said, I had no idea that this still existed, was the pros and cons of co-education. And apparently in Japan, this is a controversy, and it's about mixed-sexed education versus single-sexed education. And so the students were very much just amazed at those kinds of differences of culture that they saw. So what are their benefits? I would say the first benefit was the opportunity to engage in a cultural encounter. I think this is incredibly important in terms of globalizing a curriculum and making it accessible to basically engage students to meet others of a different culture. And that was really great. The second benefit was comparative reflection, that throughout their analysis and their participation, they were able to comparatively reflect upon a Western value system and a rational system of thinking versus a non-Western values and way of thinking. Another benefit was intellectual curiosity. When you're exposed to different cultures and values, especially during this assignment, I noticed that students were very curious about how other students of other cultures thought and valued and how they processed information. They were open-minded. They developed skills of being open-minded, and that they were willing to be challenged. As one of my students in her essay revealed, that really criticized, honestly, some Western forms of education that she didn't think of before, and that and overall learning under a collaborative global environment, learning curriculum such as this position students to take on this position of humility, because what they did find was that they did not know any Japanese language, but the students in Japan did know a lot more English, and that they were very, there was already, they felt like almost this willingness to learn from the students in Japan because of these kinds of learning, different learning capacities that they already started off with. So I'll end there.
Wow, that's great. And I'm really glad you mentioned humility, because that's a big part of study abroad, is entering a foreign country and entering an environment where the language is different, the culture is different, and learning that, and learning to be humble. And I think that's great that your students were able to get that even through the Zoom or the COIL experience. Okay, so in order to keep on time, we're gonna combine the last parts too. So the next part is I want you guys to touch on some of the challenges, and it's kind of too bad we're ending with the negative part, but the reason I want to do this, it's really important, because I am hoping that more faculty will be inspired to take on this kind of a project. And there are some significant challenges to doing so. They're not insurmountable, but it's worth sort of knowing what they are in advance. So Mike, you want to talk about any challenges you had? Oh, and I should say, I'm sorry, also challenges, and would you do this again? Challenges you had, and would you do it again? So
sure. Yeah, I mean, just kind of off the bat, like my class is also asynchronous. So I can't assign, like, because asynchronous class, I can't assign like we have to meet this. So it's more of an optional course at this point. Maybe if we get back into synchronous or hybrid, I can make it a little more required. But so on one hand, it's sort of trying to get the participation. I would like more students to participate. I had 2 last semester. This semester, I've sent some emails out. I'm getting some responses, so hopefully we'll get some more. Now that I have these sort of testimonials, I'll send those out. So I guess on my challenge part is just trying to get, I got to sell it. I got to sell it to my students and get them excited about it. Which I've been sending emails And then the time wise, to make it work with the class in Japan, it's usually in the evening time in Hawaii, like 5 or 6 on a weekday, which I know can be difficult for people who have lives outside of school. So that's a challenge, but again, I don't think it's not insurmountable. I think some people can do it, getting excited about it. I thought one challenge was going to be the conversation, but once the class started, I mean, people kind of took it. So, going into it, I was like, oh, what if it's just an hour of silence? And I found that wasn't the case at all. People were, once people kind of got engaged and questions came up, I felt the conversation went pretty well, and will I do it again? Yeah, I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to keep trying to put it in the curriculum. I have a pretty good colleague at University of Ryukyu that has a same sort of like cultural class going on there. So we're just going to kind of work on this and try to kind of streamline it, make it a little more, kind of get a system going. Also trying to kind of work into our different semesters because Japan I think they'll start back up to like beginning of April. So once we get each other's schedules going and I can kind of organize it and put it embed it into the syllabus at least sooner, I think students will be, oh yeah, that sounds fun. And the more people we get, the more testimonials I can get. And and I really think, similar to what Celia said, I mean, study abroad, I think is super important. And here's an example of a way students can do it. So yeah, I will continue to use it.
Thanks. Good. Glad to hear it. Kelly, how about you? What were some of the challenges you've run into? And I know you are going to continue to use it, but you can address that too.
Well, the obvious challenges are the time zones and the language differences. But more than that, I think it's really good that the students struggle. In my classes, I purposely let a lot of the students struggle. And then when they reach a roadblock, for example, last semester, they had a project on a commercial real estate and some of the Japanese students didn't quite understand the nuance. So I brought in one of my clients from Japan and she translated to the Japanese students some of the nuanced complexities of the project, and that was able to go forward. So you find there are challenges, but there's ways of solving it. And I really like the students to try to solve them on their own. And then of course, coach them when asked to. But the obvious challenges can be overcome. Most of the students are really good about being respectful of other students and accommodating their schedules. And the last thing is all of my classes are taught in the evening. So it makes it much easier for me to interface with Australia, San Pedro College in the Philippines, and Kansai in Japan.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, and for sure. I mean, you've had the most experience, so you've demonstrated that you can overcome all of those logistical issues. Yoshiko? Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. Sorry, Amy, your turn.
The biggest obstacle for me was understanding exactly the situation of our university with regard to COIL and the situation of, in this case, the University of the Ryukyus with regard to COIL, and the difference in funding and staffing and their particular priorities as opposed to ours. My particular situation is that I come from a very individualist culture, and I have always been working just on my own, and that has been considered a value. And I was working then with a group of folks whose highest value is collaboration. And I value that and admire it myself, but as an individual. So I almost felt like as they were creating all these wonderful resources for me, that I was like standing on the outside of the group going, let me in, but not knowing exactly how. So there was this really interesting sort of dynamic between the collaborators before it even gets to the students. And I'm really looking forward to exploring that. So it's not just that would I do it again, it's that I feel like it's just beginning and really ongoing for me. And I really look forward to taking on board some of the things that these folks have to teach me and my students about the values of collaboration and what that can bring forward. And Todd had pointed out to me that in these kinds of situations, sometimes folks will just come up with an idea and execute it immediately. And that's very foreign to our way of doing things at UH Hilo. And I tend to admire it excessively, perhaps, rather than just looking at it as another way of doing things. But at the same time, I really would like to bring that energy of mutual admiration into the ongoing work that I do, so that all of us who come from wherever we come from, students, faculty, when we're talking to each other and sharing with each other, we can have that, oh, is this how it is for you? Kind of experience, and have that sort of moment of surprise and curiosity and enthusiasm for each other's lives and music and cultures. So I'm really pumped about it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amy. Your enthusiasm is appreciated. And also, I think you're touching on one of the issues is the faculty collaboration, which is its own challenge in addition to the logistical stuff. But I see these things in the best ways as partnerships that grow, just like anything else. You work on it over time. You develop relationships with other faculty members, and then you guys figure out how best you can work this. So this shouldn't hopefully be just a one and done thing. So, okay, Yoshiko, you want to jump in?
Okay, this event was our first collaboration between UH Hilo and Toyo University. So of course we had some challenges. One of the challenges was that I mentioned before, time difference, and but their 10 a.m. and our 3 p.m. is durable. So I think the difference between Japan and Hawaii, it's manageable, as long as we set it up not too early for their university students and not too late for our students. And then another type of challenge, or technological challenges, at Toyo University, they don't customarily use Zoom. They have their own their institutional setup for the synchronous meetings, class meetings. So since they don't have the institutional account, I had to be the main host, set up everything, and then joining as a Zoom participants, it's free. So they didn't have to pay anything extra, but I had to present, arranged things in advance with Zoom. And then I myself don't use Zoom for my synchronous class meeting. I use Google Meet. So I'm used to that tool. So I had to kind of learn to use Google as a tool myself. And then third type of challenge was cultural differences. One of the differences is in this school culture at Toyo University, students don't show their face, and to us, it's kind of odd to talk, to someone with just an icon, right, in the tiles. So initially, the Toyo University's partner professors and I were kind of worried, the difference. My students were used to showing themselves, well, they don't normally do that. Their students don't normally do that. So they kind of politely nudge them to show themselves at the time of the event. So in the end, everything works. They weren't really shy about that. So everybody showed up and showed themselves, especially during their breakout room sessions. So it worked out. My personality is like, okay, if there are challenges, then let's find out what they are. And then after that, let's figure out approaches to them. So those challenges are not intimidating to me, but just to put some kind of, mind at ease, I try to conceptualize this event as an experiment. So since this is an experimental opportunity, not so much pressure, we don't have to prove ourselves to anybody. Right? So that was a good, I think a frame to to us, the organizers. And then second thing we did was planning ahead. We exchange ideas by email a lot of time, and we also met in person through Zoom at least 3 times, I think, in advance. So planning was the key, and that's really helped us eliminate potential errors and breakdowns there. So would I do that again? My answer is yes, of course. In fact, Toyo University and I already talked about next semester's collaboration events. And next time we will do this kind of interaction twice with the same group of students. The reason is based on my students' feedback and theirs, students like some time to get to know each other. So if it's a one time, and then icebreaker is just a little too short for them to feel comfortable. So for them to have the second time to meet again will be a big benefit. So there will be some changes I'm going to make. One of them is the frequency of the meeting, and then I will also change the structures of the event and so forth. So definitely I will do that again.
Those are really good points, because a lot of it is just the communication to prepare, and then of course the willingness to carry on. And as you said, actually having sat through that, I mean, having a second session like that is going to be, I think, actually exponentially more beneficial, because the students were clearly comfortable by the end, and so they won't have to go through that whole thing before. So that's a really good idea. Francis, do you want to talk about some of the challenges you run into? Because yours is you're Oman, you're in the Philippines, you're in Hawaii.
Yeah, right. Actually, there are a lot of challenges that I encountered in this COIL. In this kind of collaboration that I have with this 2 universities, because it requires planning and scheduling. It really took time, and it required me like more than a month preparations for the plotting and matching the courses and the schedules in these 2 universities, and our schedule also here, also considering the time difference and the students' schedule here, because we have to match the students' availability, because the teaching was planned to be synchronous. And so the scheduling is really very problematic at first, but we're able to resolve it. And constant communication with the professors and instructors in other universities, because I want my students to be supervised individually. So there is really a close kind of monitoring with the performance of the students. And I have to communicate to each professor who will monitor the students and supervise the students. And I have to attend also regular meetings in Oman. I have to attend regular meetings in the Philippines. And it's just like I was working in 3 different universities at the same time. And the time difference, because in Oman, there like 14-hour difference. It's just like daytime here, it's nighttime there. So I have to adjust my time. So the time difference was really an issue, not just for me, but for my students as well. And like the schedule of classes that they have, I have students who will teach at 6 o'clock in the morning here, and others will teach in the evening. So we made that plan in order to accommodate, the students here and the students also in Oman. So there were classes conducted in the morning, and there were classes also conducted during nighttime. And the weekends and the weekdays are totally different, because in the Middle East, the weekdays are from Sunday to Thursday. And Sunday, supposedly the students have to rest, but they have no choice. They have to be there. And our weekends are Friday and Saturday. So that's one of the biggest challenge. And one more thing also is that interacting and communicating and dealing with people from different countries, you really have to be familiar with their culture as well. Not just the students who would be familiar with it, but you as a professor who would be dealing with them, you have to be familiar with that too. And luckily, I had experience working in many different countries, like 10 years working in the Philippines, 12 years working in Malaysia, and 3 years working in the Middle East. So at least I could easily navigate and easily adjust, with their culture. And like scheduling for a meeting, they would just tell you like a day before. They'll say, "Oh, we have a meeting tomorrow at this time." And then, your schedule would also be affected. My students are also giving me some inputs of the challenges that they experience and how they overcome those challenges. And one of my students told me that the biggest challenge that he experienced was not knowing if the students really understood them because of the cultural differences. And he said that in an online teaching, it would be very tough, especially if they don't really see the students faces, especially in the Middle East, where most of the students, especially the females, would not show their face, and they would not know the whether the students really understand. And this is somehow a cultural differences, but the student was saying that it was good in a way because it allowed him to become more intuitive towards the needs of the students. Yeah, and others are actually having issues with communication, and there are, because in other countries they're also using their own variety of English, and sometimes our students here could not really understand sometimes what they mean. It's not just the words that they use, even the way they phrase, the way they say it would be a little bit different, and many of them are not really direct when they speak, when they talk, and the students have to figure out what they actually mean. But constant communication with the supervisors and with the students really help them to better understand how to do things. I always tell them that always communicate you have if you're confused with the message that you received, or if you're confused during the interaction, the best thing for you to do is to keep on asking what it means, because that's how they can understand, and they can eventually understand each other. So with the many challenges that we've encountered, I and my students, all of those are actually learning experiences, not just for me, but for my students as well. And I would say I will definitely do this again, and will continue to do this because it benefits a lot, the students, and also all my classes. So I'm now constantly communicating with these two universities for future collaborations. And one more thing also is that there were also opportunities for me to conduct trainings in Oman and in the Philippines, sharing with my experience of teaching here and the different approaches and the different strategies. And it's the learning is not just between or among the students, but the learning is also with me as a professor. So it's a double kind of, or multiple benefits that uh, we get from this experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a really important point, is that it's not just for the students. So Celia, you want to talk about some of the challenges you had, and if you do it again, which I don't even know.
Of course, I'll do it again. But I did have some challenges. And because this was my first time doing it, there were a lot of problems associated with the course was asynchronous, and the students had to communicate via Padlet, so new technologies had to be learned by the students, and also there was a university, Kansai University had their own special platform that they use to put the COIL collaboration, organize the COIL collaboration. So students had to like log into that in its own special way, in their own way. But then also all of their discussion was on chat or on, we gave them the opportunity to use whatever mode of discussion or communication outside of that environment. And so some people used Discord, other people used some other kinds of platforms for messaging. But again, I couldn't see any of those discussions taking place. I could only see the discussions taking place within the shared collaborative format. And what ended up happening is that I would say about half my students participated in groups in which the discussion was very minimal. And I tried to get them to say, well, ask again, like try to get them to facilitate, just continue to ask the questions, like here's the assignment. But it was very difficult to like, they would say, I tried, but no response, right? So I've had half students just do that, like experience it that way, where I would say, I would say 25% of the students were in groups where there were maybe 2 or 3 responses from the other side, at Kansai University. Additionally, and I think that was my biggest challenge there, was trying to figure out how to facilitate discussions. And how I would do it again next time, I think, is to try to be able to manage to see the discussions taking place in each of the groups. And I don't want to micromanage the discussions, but on an asynchronous class where you kind of give them a free-for-all to say, well, just communicate with each other on your own. And of course, the time difference, without me at least having some kind of relationship to that discussion to try to encourage the discussion, or just say, here's what you could do, or hey, how about this, right? That was something that I would do differently, is to be able to set up a common place of communication so all of us I can check in on them, honestly. And it's not to say that I don't trust the students, it's just that it's kind of like how I normally do discussion board posts. I grade the discussion board posts, and I would say, like, this is how you could improve your responses and things like that. But I think that would be one way to address that issue. And of course, the cultural values, because, when silences do occur, how do you interpret those silences? And oftentimes, some cultures, I know, in some Asian cultures, silence might be interpreted as not participating, when in fact, there is levels of participation, but we may not be able to see it via online, this kind of format. And I think I would try to do a kind of asynchronous meeting at least once. If I teach this again, I would do it in a face-to-face kind of environment, and then put together a COIL component that is synchronous, because I think there's something about all of us being together, in one synchronous meeting that can then propel conversations with each other. The videos were great to introduce the students to each other, but I don't know if those videos introductions are enough to really generate that type of collaborative relationship that needs to occur between students. And so, so there are those sorts of strategies that I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah. To that, does anybody have any suggestions or thoughts on that issue of getting the communication there, especially when it's asynchronous? Any of you guys who have been doing this?
Well, there's one really good option. The platform that Kansai uses and that we've been using this past year is Class to Class Immerse You.
Mm-hmm.
And Celia alluded to that, but the benefits of that platform is you can have various teams involved in their own discussion boards, and the faculty can go in and monitor those discussions and actively participate. So class to class resolves a lot of the challenges that I've been hearing.
Is that a Kansai specific thing?
No, no, it's not. In fact, the class to class academic advisor is on this webinar. His name is Loy Shikihata Ashton, and he's the academic facilitator for class to class. I don't know if you want to say anything, Loy, briefly, but he's the one who does all of our facilitation with class to class platform.
Sure, Loy, if you want to add something in.
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to take up your time. I've really enjoyed listening to all of the use cases that everybody has shared. And as a former senior international officer myself and department chair, I've done a lot of COIL and can share a lot of your experiences before coming to class to do what I'm doing now with the organization. So yeah, I would love to be able to work with anybody who's got questions about how we can help you with increased levels of student engagement. Our class to class is a benefit corporation and a social enterprise, and we have designed something that's meant to be a socially responsible alternative to a lot of the technology that's out there that uses data exploitation and surveillance capitalism as a type of business model, and we are adamantly opposed to that. So the type of virtual exchange and COIL environment that we provide for students is radically different, and hopefully much more is something that we as instructors can ease our consciences on, but also be simpler to use too. So I've enjoyed working with Kelly over these last 2 semesters, helping him with his students with San Pedro College and with Kansai. And yes, we did develop this in conjunction with Kansai and with the Japanese government, but we've also worked very closely with the State University of New York, the SUNY COIL Center, and a number of other consortia as well. So I'd be happy to meet with anybody individually or even as a group to tell you more.
Okay, thanks, Lloyd. Well, we've already sort of over our time, but Kelly had asked if you can invite one of his students, Nicholas, who has jumped on. And so for those of you who can stay for a little bit, I think, Nicholas, you're going to talk briefly about your experience in COIL classes with Kelly. So go ahead.
I'll try to keep it condensed. I was able to take a COIL class with Kelly last semester, and I'm currently in another one with him right now for his Finance 370 class. And I did really enjoy the COIL experience. I wasn't expecting exactly when I first heard it. I didn't know exactly what we were getting into, but kind of putting your feet to the fire type of teaching is Kelly's style. And it was really interesting getting to hop on. I didn't have anybody in my group from Japan, so our group had was sort of lucky being able to simplify the language barrier to only between the Philippines and Hawaii. While our group was still quite fairly large at, I think, nearly 10 people big, we were still able to communicate. We did most of our communication, like Cecile was talking about, off Immerse You. We didn't talk mostly there. So our discussion board seemed very empty if you were to look at our team's engagement. But when we went to work on WhatsApp, we were constantly messaging each other every day. We used a mixture of Zoom meetings and WhatsApp to be in contact because there were certain things. We were also lucky enough that there was like 3 to 4 people from the Philippines and 1 person from Indonesia that spoke really, really good English, and that really did help our communication. The others who did not, sadly, it did hinder it. But on WhatsApp, it was a lot easier to chime in instead of on Zoom. But we tried to have a varying ways to communicate with one another that allowed us to communicate as often as possible. And then when we needed to discuss important information, we tried to save that for our Zoom meetings. And to kind of document, because one of the requirements by Kelly was to document our discussions as much as possible. We sent in a screenshot of our Zoom meetings when we did them offsite, but we had a kind of safe space in our WhatsApp where like a professor couldn't check in, where like all our ideas could be not judged, because even if the professors wouldn't, we'd feel especially that way if anybody could hop into our discussion. And it also allowed us to kind of do icebreaker activities, sending jokes to each other, having inside jokes, almost like a workplace environment for our small team. So it was great to have a form of documented chat. I think we also did rely on having that safe space a lot.
So what kind of
But yeah,
conversation did you guys have in WhatsApp that was different than what you were doing on Zoom?
I think with Immerse You, when we say anything on Immerse You, it was very like an email, like here's what we were doing, here's why, and that's kind of it. We didn't really want to bombard some place where professors need to check for information with stuff like jokes or little things we noticed that during the class that maybe didn't line up, because sometimes one professor from San Pedro said something and that didn't line up with something from we were hearing from Kelly. So we would have to discuss and reorganize ourselves and like, is this what we're doing or is this what we're doing? And then we get to be a little more messier and a little more candid in WhatsApp.
I think it's an interesting point. So we've kind of gone over where we hope, but that's because you guys have had so much to share. And we're pretty much down to our core group. I just want to say thank you guys for taking the leap. I mean, it obviously took a lot of your time and energy, and also then again for sharing today. I forget who suggested, maybe it was Amy last week, or one of you guys suggested possibly doing a follow-up session where faculty could just talk. And I've taken down who participated today, who joined, and I will follow up with that to see if there could be a time where actually you guys can just, those of you who are interested in using this can sit down and actually just talk to each other on Zoom. And I'll see if I can organize that in the next, couple of weeks. And yeah, but if you guys are interested. Also, again, let me throw out to you guys who know, but also throw out to others. With our partnerships, we have access to people who I can reach out to if you guys have specific interests, specific places, specific schools, specific topics. We have a lot of contacts that we've established through our exchange program, so that I'm very happy to use for this purpose. So always let me know, and I hope you guys keep it up. Any last comments from any of you guys? Okay. Well, a huge mahalo to all of you, and you'll be hearing more from me about this, and always follow up with me and let me know how I can help keep this moving along for you guys. And thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Lloyd, for joining us. Okay. All right.
Thanks for letting me come.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. That's great. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.